Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, growing escalation with Pyongyang promising more rocket launches and Washington increasing deployment in the south. We look at the growing tensions on the Korean Peninsula. And focus on Southeast Asia. As ASEAN leaders meet with U.S. President Barack Obama in the United States, we discuss U.S. interests in the region and the impact of America's role. Welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. We begin our show with growing fears of arms buildup on the Korean Peninsula. Pyongyang is pledging further missile tests, while Washington is preparing to ramp up deployment of advanced defense systems in the south. 4 nuclear-capable F-22 stealth fighters and Joint Stannis nuclear-powered supercarrier are on the list. Is there a way to stop the cycle, or are we looking, or is the region already spiraling into a dangerous arms race?
Face-off on the Korean Peninsula. After the success of its long-range rocket launch, the DPRK is setting up an all-new military unit, aiming mobile launchers at the continental United States. The U.S. is responding with new deployments in South Korea, including Patriot missile batteries, an attack submarine, and a nuclear-powered supercarrier. South Korean President Park Geun-hye pledged further strong measures to come.
From now on, the South Korean government will take stronger and more effective measures to make the North realize that its nuclear ambitions will not help it survive, but only result in speeding up the collapse of the regime and change itself.
Washington and Seoul have also agreed on the deployment of an advanced U.S. missile defense system. Terminal High Altitude Area Defense is also known as THAAD. It's one of the most advanced missile defense systems in the world, capable of intercepting and destroying ballistic missiles inside or just outside the atmosphere during their final phase of flight. It's a move China considers controversial, a position officials made clear in a meeting with South Korea's foreign minister.
We exchanged opinions on the THAAD system. China has expressed opposition to its deployment. Related countries should take a cautious action.
China's foreign minister went even further, accusing the U.S. of using Korean tensions to its own strategic advantage.
Actually, the facts are clear. The deployment of a THAAD system by the United States, including the X-wave radar, the scope of the coverage goes far beyond the defense needs of the Korean Peninsula, and the coverage would mean that it will reach deep into the Asian continent. This directly affects the strategic security interests of China and other countries on the Asian continent.
Beijing has long urged a resumption of talks over the DPRK's nuclear program, arguing that sanctions are not an end in and of themselves.
We believe that the focus of the peninsula nuclear issue is on the U.S. and the DPRK. We are willing to urge both countries to be seated, talk and discuss how to address each other's reasonable concerns so as to finally achieve the goal we all hope.
The response to the DPRK missile threat continues to be divided, with the U.S. increasing deployment and China urging dialogue. For now, the peninsula remains a major source of international concern, with no clear path to easing tensions.
For more on the tension of the Korean Peninsula and beyond, we are joined here in our Beijing studio, Yuan Peng, Vice President of China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. Welcome, sir. Meanwhile, in Seoul, we are joined by Mr. Shin Chang-hoon, who is a Senior Research Fellow at the Korea Institute for Maritime Strategy. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., we are joined by Mr. Douglas Paul, Vice President for Studies at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. This is a very busy news day regarding the Korean Peninsula. First of all, Mr. Yuan, Chinese Executive Vice Foreign Minister Zhang Ye-sui met with his South Korean counterpart, Mr. Lim, today. He reiterated China's strong opposition against the possible deployment of THAAD, which is the missile defense system, by the U.S. into South Korea. Help us to understand, Mr. Yuan, why so strongly the opposition from China?
First of all, I think it's our long-time stand to position this kind of anti-missile system. From last century, 80s to 90s, the TMD system in Alaska and Japan, we saw this kind of dangerous actions to deter Chinese capabilities, and this thought can be viewed as a part of the whole anti-missile arc system from Alaska to Japan to South Korea to Philippines and Australia. And secondly, we think maybe it's quite understandable from the South Korea and the American stand to deter North Korean nuclear capability. But we think it's go beyond much more the basic needs in doing that, because of the thought system can go beyond from North Korea, Korean Peninsula to cover the whole China and even reach to Russia and Central Asia.
I see.
So it's very easy for us to think this system is not just for the single purpose to deter DPRK.
Does Washington, Mr. Paul, understand the very strong concern coming from China? What is likely to be the balance that Washington wants to take?
Well, I think Washington has heard the Chinese objections very clearly. It's difficult for me to understand how a leader of South Korea or a leader in Washington can tell the people of the two countries that we have a defense capability against this new threat, but we're not going to take action to deter that threat. That's just not possible in democracies. And so this technology is going to go forward. It's not, as the government says over and over again, it's not aimed at China. It has a residual capability that might affect China, but the driving force is the threat that is unmistakably coming from North Korea.
Okay, Mr. Paul, may I just follow up a little bit? Are we running out of options besides deploying the specific missile defense system? As we all know, Mr. Yuan clearly also mentioned that this can go much beyond the defense needs of just the Korean Peninsula.
Well, I think you're right. We are running out of options. The effort by China to get back on a negotiating track was highlighted just a couple of weeks ago when Ambassador Wu Dawei went to North Korea and tried to persuade them not to go ahead with a missile test, as far as we can tell. And the test was announced while he was in Pyongyang.
All right.
The North has been on a path to develop their capabilities as rapidly as they can be developed. And whether we've had six-party talks or efforts to reach out from the United States for new kinds of bilateral talks or anti-missile talks, every one of these has been frustrated by the North's determination to develop weapons of mass destruction and the means to deliver them.
Okay, let's go to Mr. Shin from South Korea. We understand it has been announced by the Yongnam news agency that there will be several military actions aimed at dealing with the crisis of the Korean Peninsula from the U.S. and also from South Korea. First of all, 4 F-22 stealth fighters will likely to be sent to South Korea on Wednesday, tomorrow. Meanwhile, there's also likely the deployment of 2 aircraft carrier. One is USS North Carolina, the other is USS John Stennis. The question is, will these be helpful? Do we really need so-called deployment of a missile defense system, which might raise concern of a lot of countries in this region, not just about the Korean Peninsula peace and stability anymore?
In order to face the North Korea's nuclear crisis, I think we need, the United States strategic assets for the time being. And in addition, the South Korean public was really concerned about the growing threats from North Korea, especially with nuclear weapons. So the South Korean government is really concerned about the method to appease the South Korean publics. So that's why the South Korean government is considering the introduction of THAAD system, because THAAD system is not an attack system, it is defensive system. So I think, it is closely related to national defense, the interest of national defense.
Mr. Shin, may I just follow up also by asking you, what exactly are you referring to when you said tap into the United States strategic assets? What does those strategic assets mean to South Korea? Exactly what you're talking about here. Secondly, may I also ask, how does South Korea going to keep that balance between a very good relation with China developed over the past few years, particularly even between the two presidents of our two countries, and the concern of China that the U.S. deploying system might have a double sword focus or purposes, in fact. How does South Korea keep its balance here?
Well, actually, South Korea does not have any means to dominate the escalated tensions by North Korea, because North Korea possesses nuclear weapons. So that's why South Korea needs or help from the United States from the perspective of strategic assets. So the fighters and inceptors or the THAAD systems would be the, effective strategic assets to deter North Korea from using nuclear weapons. But however, well, some people are concerned about the, arms race in Northeast Asia by introducing these kinds of strategic assets. But most important thing is that South Korea is trying to introduce not the attacking system, it's just to introduce defense systems.
All right. Mr. Yuan, you've heard your two colleagues, both from Seoul and Washington. Your response?
I don't agree that we have run out of all the options in dealing with the nuclear issue of DPRK. For example, we didn't try the substantial cooperation between U.S. and China, and we didn't try our coordination among China, ROC, and the United States.
Elaborate, please. What exactly do you mean?
In the past several years, President Obama's administration stick to the so-called strategic patience policy toward North Korea. Strategic patience, for me to say, is nothing to be, means do nothing, and then want to contract it to China to deal with the North Korean issue, unilaterally. Actually, China ourselves cannot interfere a sovereign country's domestic affairs. Our influence on the DPRK is not as big as many other countries imagined. So strategic impatience means do nothing, means American lack of its own responsibilities. Now, because of the fourth try and satellite or missile launching, American now changed radically from strategic patience to strategic impatience, which means send two aircraft carriers, F-22, and THAAD system in South Korea. All this all of a sudden makes the situation even worse. So China is a country with 5,000 years of history. We know the complicated situation. We deal it in the Chinese way. But American is a young nation, 200 more years, and think something want to overcome the situation overnight.
Well, Mr. Yuan, is it really a competition of history? Of the many years that China has had in history or the United States. Let's talk about what you have just mentioned, the relations between China and the DPRK, besides what you have just talked about the U.S. With DPRK. China today also expressed its messages to DPRK leaders about the birthday of its great leader. Mentioning the spokesperson of the foreign ministry, the traditional friendship between China and DPRK. On the other hand, China is also working on, with the international community's, quote, a new and harder resolution by the United Nations toward the DPRK as a result of its rocket launch and also a nuclear test. So where exactly is China? Many would wonder. Where is China now?
I think this is China's special way to deal with this situation.
What
because
is it?
The nuclear issue is very, very complicated than many others imagined. So Chinese way, on the one hand, we still value our relations with DPRK, because without this very special relations, we lack of any meaningful ways to influence, even if the influence is not as big as many imagined, but still we have some influence. For example, David's visit and our linkage with top leaders of DPRK. But on the other hand, given the situation, we strongly support a harder resolution in UN. This is the other way. And thirdly, we persuade the relevant parties to back to the negotiation.
Okay, let me talk to Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul, back to negotiation. Is that possible? Before we go to that in detail, let me just ask you very specifically, what exactly is the function of that? According to its official description, it is a system be able to intercept and destroy missiles both in or out of the atmosphere at the very final stage of its flight. And it is having an impact not just within the geographical location of the Korean Peninsula, but rather, as Mr. Yuan put it earlier already, in China, in Russia, and even in other Asian countries. So the concern is very natural from other countries about the U.S. Purposes, not just Korean Peninsula. So how would the U.S. choose its appropriate action and also going back to the negotiation table dealing directly with DPRK? Mr. Paul.
On the first part of your question about theater high altitude area defense, this is meant to catch a rocket in the boost phase when it's launching early on. I can't imagine that the commanders operating a system, if it were in place in South Korea, would have authority to launch such missiles against missiles arriving from or being launched in either China or Russia. This is aimed at North Korea. The capabilities to make this happen require long-range, highly accurate radars. You can't fire an inaccurate with an inaccurate radar, and so we have an inherent contradiction between the need for certain capabilities to deal with the emerging North Korean threat and the perception in China and perhaps in Russia that this is also aimed at their missiles. The second part you asked about was the negotiating record. I don't agree with my good friend Yuan Peng on the question of strategic patience. I've not heard that phrase from officials in Washington. That's a journalistic meme. The U.S. has been relatively quiet on the diplomatic front recently, but only because they've been totally unsuccessful previously. When Obama first came to office, he reached out to North Korea, and his reward within a month and a half was a nuclear test. In 2010, the U.S. gave visas for resuming negotiations to Kim Dae-gwan from North Korea twice.
So
both times led to eruptions on the Korean Peninsula.
So negotiation is not possible. U.S. is not at all, under what circumstances, deal with DPRK directly?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. I think we had in August a flare-up of tensions after North Korean military killed some South Korean troops on the DMZ with a bomb they had placed there. That led to an agreement on August 25 that seemed to open the door to better contacts between the two sides. And then China's leader, Liu Yunshan, made an important visit to Pyongyang later that fall. What's been shocking is that since December, the North's new capabilities, both military weapons and launching capabilities have been pushed forward, and North Korea is simply pushing aside the efforts of the United States and China to try, or South Korea, to try to reach a negotiated settlement. So we know where the problem is. The problem is how do we get North Korea to pay attention to our concerns?
Mr. Yuan, it seems that Mr. Paul illustrating the U.S. perspective and not interested in directly dealing with DPRK anymore.
I mean, before any substantial military redeployment or military operations, at least, even if you don't like the six-party talks, but at least we need the UN as a platform to discuss the meaningful, sanctions or resolutions. This is the basic. Before that, any military-related actions, I think, lead to a vicious circle.
All right. And before we go, I also want to address Mr. Shin from South Korea. One brief question. Please also answer it briefly. Running out of time, Mr. Shin. This is a very big political matter. It's not just the national interest and national security, but rather a political matter in your country. How do you think the Park administration would be able to survive this? Siding with the U.S. or rather try to keep a good balance for the region?
At the moment, we have to concentrate on how to punish for the wrongdoings committed by North Korea. So after that, well, we can discuss how to solve these problems with dialogue. So at the moment, well, sanctions, tougher sanctions is inevitable.
Okay. Shin Chang-hun coming from Seoul, South Korea, Douglas Paul from Washington, D.C., the United States, and Yuan Peng with us here in Beijing from China. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us and expressing your own perspective. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Stay with us here on World Inside. We've got our final segment coming right up. Focus on Southeast Asia as ASEAN leaders meet with U.S. President Barack Obama. We discuss U.S. interests in the region and the impact of America's role. Welcome back to World Insight on CCTV News. The United States and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations have kicked off a two-day summit at the Sunnylands in the U.S. California, the same location where Obama once hosted Chinese President Xi Jinping. Leaders are expected to discuss economic ties and strengthen the world's largest trade pact. Our panel will be discussing this important relationship in just a moment, but first, take a look at this.
A strong and enduring partnership. That's how U.S. President Barack Obama described the relationship with ASEAN as he opened the summit on Monday. It's the first of its kind to be held on U.S. soil and puts an exclamation point on a presidency that's put a renewed focus on the Asia-Pacific.
And few regions present more opportunity to the 21st century than the Asia-Pacific. That's why early in my presidency I decided that the United States, as a Pacific nation, would rebalance our foreign policy and play a larger and long-term role in the Asia-Pacific. And this has included engagement with Southeast Asia and ASEAN.
The Obama administration has seen a greater focus on Southeast Asia. November saw the two sides establish a strategic partnership aimed at deepening economic and security ties. On Monday, it was economic issues that took center stage. According to the White House, trade between the U.S. and the ASEAN region in goods expanded 5% in 2015 and now tops $226 billion US. Meanwhile, U.S. companies have more than doubled investment in the region since 2008.
Since I took office, we've boosted trade between the United States and ASEAN by 55%. The region is now our fourth largest goods trading partner, including U.S. exports that support more than 500,000 American jobs. U.S. companies have been the largest source of foreign investment in ASEAN.
The first day's meeting also focused on the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal, which includes 4 ASEAN members: Vietnam, Singapore, Brunei, and Malaysia. Others are also interested in joining the Free Trade Pact that was signed earlier this month in New Zealand. The final step involves ratification by member states. Obama's foreign policy has been partly defined by the Pivot to Asia strategy. The administration will likely point to progress with ASEAN as proof of its success. But with an election looming in the U.S., it remains to be seen whether his successor will continue to follow the same course.
For more on this relation between the United States and ASEAN countries, what does it mean for China and elsewhere in Asia? We are joined here in the Beijing studio, Mr. Yang Xiyu, who is a senior fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome, sir. Meanwhile, joining us from Manila in the Philippines, we're having Mr. Richard Javad Khedarian, who is a political science professor at the De La Salle University and also author of the Asia's New Battlefield. Meanwhile, joining us from the United States, we are having Mr. Max Wolf, professor of economics at the New School University in New York. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. How much do you think real content is likely to be discussed at the U.S. ASEAN summit, given the fact that some of the leaders of these countries are likely to leave their posts quite soon? Let's go to Mr. Khedarian.
Yes, of course, one of the awkward things is that both President Obama and President Benigno Aquino of the Philippines will be stepping down in the coming months. Of course, Obama has almost a year before he steps down, but Aquino only has a few months left. So I think what they will try to discuss in this summit is how to make sure that they present this meeting as a capstone of their diplomatic engagement. Of course, on the part of President Aquino, this will clearly be his final major diplomatic engagement, and I'm sure that he'll try to show to the Filipino public that he made sure that the United States is on the side of the Philippines, particularly on the issue of the South China Sea, and of course he used that summit as a way to create a more robust bilateral relationship between the two countries. As you may know, just recently the Philippine Supreme Court cleared the implementation of the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. So soon the American troops and American vessels and American military will have more rotational presence. So I'm sure there will be discussions on that.
All right. That of course for the country of the Philippines. But what about from the United States? Professor Wolf, pivot to Asia, later termed as rebalance in Asia. Those are the terms by the Obama administration describing its strategic purposes toward this continent. Some say it is more strategic, more military. Others suggest it is more about economic and trade. What do you subscribe to and make of this meaning of this specific summit?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. It's a bit difficult to answer only because some constituencies in the United States are principally animated by a sense of competition for global power in a more military and diplomatic sense, and other constituents are more focused on the dollars and cents of economic cooperation. Normally, the economic cooperation is dominant in the U.S. In an election year where people will politicize anything possible and where some amount of saber rattling and nationalism helps you get elected, we shift a little bit more toward the political concern. So both political and strategic concerns have motivated a refocus on Asia. And I think the United States has historically felt like some business opportunities were lost, as well as some sense of dominance to a surging China. And I think that also allows for maybe a bit of an opening for the United States to gain some leverage in conversations that have been long ongoing with places like Vietnam, principally, and the Philippines.
Mr. Yang, China, of course, is the largest trading partner for ASEAN countries, followed by the European Union and also Japan. The U.S. falls into the fourth place. That's why the U.S. have what they call so-called ASEAN Connect. That's a new way of U.S. dealing with this region. What does China make of all of this? First of all, it's a summit among all the leaders. Secondly, it's in Sunnyland. Don't forget that. The state of California, where the Chinese president met with the U.S. president and make a big story out of this. So what do you make of this recent meeting?
Well, first of all, I think such a summit, this time, this summit between President Obama and the ASEAN countries' leaders produced more symbolic than substantive. Not only because of, you mentioned the factors, say some of the leaders are going to leave their terms, but more importantly because the diversified goals among the 10+ leaders make more difficulty for the single or few focuses to achieve. So basically, such a summit can enhance the atmosphere for the engagement between the two sides. But in practice, there's a long way to go to achieve any of the individual results. But
Mr. Yang, may I just follow up, because Mr. Hidarian from the Philippines have already mentioned the pact, the strategic pact, U.S. and Philippines, likely to be implemented, already passed Congress to their countries. And then, of course, the TPP is also a very attractive term for many of the ASEAN countries. Some already members of it, others waiting on the list, while China is not being invited at all. So it seems on both sides, strategic and trade and economic terms, U.S. and ASEAN countries getting ever closer. What does that mean for China?
I don't think China will be mind if U.S. ASEAN economic ties is getting closer. To the contrary, the closer economic ties between ASEAN and the U.S. will benefit Chinese economy.
What do you mean?
Well, China is both the most important trading partner with the United States and ASEAN, right? When the other parties get closer, China will certainly get a benefit from both the U.S. market and the ASEAN market. So there's really a win-win structure rather than zero-sum game structure in terms of economic arena. However, in the security arena, we are indeed following the zero-sum game right now. Say, when our Filipino friends talk about closer military ties between the Philippines and the U.S., China really care about the closer and closer military ties between the two sides because designed to the South China Sea disputes. Originally, it's a dispute between the bilateral related countries, Philippines and China. But now, suddenly, the third party move in. That will make a more complicated situation for the solution.
Mr. Hidarian from the Philippines, therefore I go to you. We've seen U.S. President Barack Obama at the very beginning of this summit. He's already talking a lot about many of the thorny issues of the region. For example, he talked about the South China Sea, talked about the conflicts between China and some of the member countries of ASEAN individually with China. And also he talked even about the DPRK nuclear issue with the ASEAN leaders, even though that's not necessarily the region that the ASEAN countries are. And also he talked about the trade and economic ties. Is it more of empty talk, do you think? Because so many things are being mentioned, not focused well, or is it likely to be the approach that the U.S. would have toward the ASEAN countries to bring up everything about Asia and talk about it at least? Mr. Hidarian.
Well, right. I mean, they're both symbolic and tangible things that the United States is trying to achieve in this summit. The first thing is that the Obama administration is trying to show that by holding this intimate summit with the ASEAN, and since they held a similar summit with Xi Jinping back in 2013, that the Obama pivot to Asia is a comprehensive engagement with all important actors. So it's not only about China, it's also about the ASEAN and broader East Asia region. But I think it's also about a catch-up that the United States is engaging in. I think the U.S. felt that when it comes to economics, it has a lot of catch-up to do. So now that you have the signing of the TPP, the U.S. is looking at, of course, having more ASEAN countries to join along. You have Indonesia, Thailand, and Philippines as a possible next round of negotiation members as far as TPP is concerned. Now, on the South China issue, I think the United States really feels a sense of urgency in light of developments in the Spratly chain of islands, in light of the reclamation in the areas. I think United States wants to mobilize maximum possible diplomatic pressure, although indirectly against China. That's why you see a mention on freedom of navigation, you see a mention on international law, but there's no assurance that countries like Laos or Cambodia, which have very strong relationship with China, will actually agree with Obama on this point.
I see. Professor Wolf, I have to go to you to illustrate and clarify something. We talk about the strategic so-called relations between the United States and ASEAN countries, but also much more important about the trade and economic ties, because the U.S. is now having this called, what you call ASEAN Connect. It is a totally new mechanism. It's something born after China raised the possibility of Silk Road, one belt, one road. How should we understand the purpose of this ASEAN Connect? How connected do you think the U.S. would be, trade and economic-wise, with the ASEAN countries, given its current status?
Yeah, I think the situation here is as follows. I think the United States very much did feel like it was muscled out of prime position in Southeast Asia, which has been an area of engagement, not always successfully, but major engagement of the United States in a major import area. It's also worth noting that places like Indonesia are among the most important and rapidly growing trading partners for the U.S., even though they're still much smaller than some of the other trading partners. Lots of growth there. And it's also a symbolic stand for U.S. influence in Asia. It was the place where we sort of made our stand historically quite often, first and last. So it's symbolically important to the United States. I think it's also important to the Obama legacy. So part of what I think you see here is a president who's been very embattled, who's about a year away, who's fighting to secure a legacy. One of the foreign policy successes that can unambiguously be more or less claimed is that American engagement in Asia, the pivot to Asia, was fairly successful. And this is a president who's battered and criticized for being less aggressive in other parts of the world or having misadventures in management, whether that be in the Middle East or other regions with Russia, etc. So this is an area of success that he wants to shine a highlight on in the sort of dusk of his presidency as well.
This is the time to look at the president's legacy. He only have less than 1 year to go, Mr. Yang. But what do you make of the long-term strategic trade and economic ties between the U.S. and ASEAN countries, particularly compared to China's relation, if we could do that comparison with these region, given China's One Belt, One Road initiatives?
Yeah, it's really a strategic question, not only to China, not only to the United States, but also to China. Compared with China's ties, economic ties with ASEAN, the shortcoming between the U.S. and the ASEAN is for connections. For example, we have got an FTA arrangement between China and ASEAN. Even Japan-ASEAN, we have a 10+1. Another 10+1 is ASEAN and Korea.
Right.
However, there haven't been some mechanism, no matter it's a connect or whatever, there haven't been a mechanism between ASEAN and the U.S. directly, although some ASEAN members has become member of the TPP. So I think for the stronger economic ties, the two sides need to set up some connect or mechanism or even FTA arrangement directly rather than indirectly via some TPP or some others.
I see. Mr. Heydarian, what does it mean to the ASEAN countries, so-called ASEAN Connect, the new initiative coming from the U.S.? You see China's exports and imports from the region of ASEAN have been going down. You've also seen the economies, both in the region, including that of China, has been going through its transformation. So how does ASEAN think about strategically its future makeup of economic and trade ties with some of the biggest players of the world? Mr. Heydarian.
Right. Well, infrastructure is really a bottleneck for much of the region. I think the Asian Development Bank made an assessment a few years ago that the region may need up to $8 trillion over 10 years in order to plug in the infrastructure spending gap in the region. And if the region wants to sustain growth and go through this period of transition and difficulty in recent months, it has to really build up its infrastructure. Now, I think the operationalization and the success of China in pushing for the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which was initially very opposed by U.S., was really a wake-up call to the world that now China is a major factor when it comes to infrastructure development in Asia. During his last speech in APEC here in Manila a few months ago, President Xi Jinping said that China is not only looking at rebalancing its economy internally away from low-end exports towards consumption and service-oriented innovation-based economy, but China is also looking at towards more rebalancing within the region. So as China moves towards more service-oriented and innovation-based economy, a lot of manufacturing in China could move to other ASEAN countries like Vietnam, Philippines, and Indonesia. And in order to have this rebalancing in the region, you need infrastructure development. Now, of course, with the economic jitters that China is experiencing, you have this kind of pushback by U.S. and also by Japan, which also announced more than $100 billion in new infrastructure spending aid to the region to kind of put a dent to China's rising profile on the infrastructure landscape. But I think China has tremendous amount of capability and capital to remain perhaps as the primary source of infrastructure development in Asia. But what the U.S. and Japan want to do is to make sure that China will not be the only major actor, but they'll also be part of this growing pie of infrastructure development and economic growth.
Mr. Yang, where is China's role eventually?
Not only the infrastructure developer, but also the institutional contributor for more effective ties among players, including the other side of the Pacific.
Very interesting. We'll see how all of these complicated relations regionally develop from here. Yang Xiyu in Beijing, Richard Heydarian in the Philippines, and also Max Wolf in the United States. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. Really appreciate it. You're watching World Insight. We'll be back after this. 杨老师要做的。Welcome back. You're watching World Insight. And the prize goes to, you guessed it, it's the award season in the U.S. entertainment world.
Producers Jack Antonoff, Nathan Chapman.
And as the first
The 58th Grammy Awards took place on Monday with Taylor Swift and Kendrick Lamar emerging as the two biggest winners. Besides the usual thank you speeches, there were also a lot of thank yous going to music legends who passed away in the year 2015. Lady Gaga paid homage to David Bowie, playing snippets of some Bowie's greatest hits, and also Eagles paid tribute to its early member Glenn Frey with a performance of Take It Easy, and Stevie Wonder and Pentatonix honored the late Maurice White of the Earth, Wind and Fire. While some of the music industry's biggest legends sadly gone, the industry itself, though, is embracing a new way of life. In the year 2014, the music industry derived 46% of its revenue from sales of physical music and 46% from digital music sales. The first time those sectors have achieved parity, according to IFPI, a trade group. That trend is only likely to continue for the year 2015 and beyond. The next battleground for record companies is in the streaming music market. That seems all the more likely as Apple Music just announced a new milestone of 11 million subscribers. But with tech giants like Apple and Google competing hard for the dominance of a transforming music industry, what does it mean for the others? Well, we'll just have to wait and see. Well, that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of our program, visit our website. Just type in World Insights CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us. Or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.